At dinner, my father stood up, pointed at me, and said something I never imagined I'd hear as an adult. "You're grounded until you apologize to your sister." Not whispered, not private. He said it in front of 20 relatives. For a second, I thought he was joking. Then I heard the laughter. Polite at first, then louder. Like I was the punchline everyone had been waiting for. I felt my face burn. My chest tightened. Every instinct in me screamed to defend myself, to explain, to fight back. But I didn't. I looked at my father, nodded once, and said, "All right." That single word made him smile. The next morning, he knocked on my bedroom door, smirking. "Learned your place?" He opened the door and froze. My room was empty. Seconds later, the front door flew open. The family lawyer rushed inside, pale and shaking, and asked my father a question that would change everything. "Sir, what have you done?" "My name is Evelyn." I was 28 years old the night my father decided to remind everyone who he thought I was. Dinner was already halfway done when it happened. Plates scraped softly against porcelain. Wine glasses clinked. Someone was laughing at a story I hadn't been listening to. The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary, the kind of smell that's supposed to mean comfort. There were 20 relatives in that dining room. Aunts, uncles, cousins I barely knew but still hugged twice a year. Everyone squeezed around the long oak table like tradition mattered more than space. My father sat at the head, as always. Across from me was my sister, Lauren, perfectly put together, hair smooth, smile, effortless. She had that calm confidence of someone who always knew she'd be backed up, no matter what. The conversation drifted toward money. It always did. "So," Lauren said lightly, swirling her wine, "Dad told me Evelyn's still freelancing. Still. Like it was a phase I hadn't grown out of." I set my fork down. "I run my own design clients. It's not still. It's just my job." Lauren tilted her head, sympathy in her eyes that didn't reach anywhere real. "I just worry about you. You've never liked stability." My father cleared his throat. The room quieted automatically. That was another thing he'd trained us to do. "Lauren's just concerned," he said. "Family looks out for each other." I nodded once. "I appreciate concern. I don't appreciate being talked about like I'm not sitting here." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. My cousin Noah met my eyes for half a second, then looked away. Lauren sighed. "See? This is what I mean. Everything turns into an argument with you." "That's not fair," I said, keeping my voice even. "You brought it up." She looked down, then back up at my father. "I'm just trying to help." I asked Evelyn to apologize earlier for snapping at me, but she wouldn't. I turned to her. "Because I didn't snap at you." I said no. That word again. No. It landed badly. My father's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. He didn't raise his voice right away. He never did. He waited until every eye was on him. "Enough," he said. "This stops now." He looked straight at me. "Evelyn, you will apologize to your sister. Right now." My heart started pounding. I didn't do anything wrong. That's when his expression hardened. "You're grounded," he said, "until you apologize to your sister." For a moment, no one reacted. Then someone laughed. A short laugh, uncomfortable, followed by another, then more. Like the room needed permission, and once it had it, the sound rolled forward on its own. I felt the heat rush up my neck, into my face. My hands went numb. 20 people, 20 witnesses, and not one of them said a word. Lauren pressed her lips together like she didn't want this, but was absolutely enjoying it. My father folded his arms. "Go to your room." I swallowed. Every part of me wanted to scream that I was an adult. That he couldn't do this. That this was humiliating and cruel and completely unnecessary. But I knew this house. I knew this game. If I fought back, I'd be dramatic. If I cried, I'd be unstable. If I defended myself, I'd be disrespectful. So I stood up slowly. I felt humiliated. I can say that now, but at the time, I just said one thing. "All right." That surprised him. It surprised everyone. My father smiled, satisfied. "Good. Maybe you're finally learning." I walked away from the table, past faces that suddenly couldn't meet my eyes, up the stairs, down the hallway, into the bedroom I'd slept in as a teenager. Behind me, dinner continued. Laughter returned. Glasses clinked again. Someone joked about how Evelyn always needed structure. I closed the door quietly. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands, waiting for the shaking to stop. The walls felt smaller than I remembered. The house felt heavier. I told myself I'd stay the night, that I'd apologize in the morning just to keep the peace, that this wasn't worth tearing the family apart. But deep down, something had shifted. Because for the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was done being small. And I didn't know it yet, but that dinner wasn't the moment I lost my place in the family. It was the moment my father lost control of the story. The room hadn't changed. That was the first thing that struck me when I turned on the lamp. Same pale blue walls, same dresser with one crooked handle, same framed photo of me at 17, standing between my parents, smiling like I believed everything would turn out fine. I closed the door quietly behind me. From downstairs, laughter drifted up the staircase. Someone poured more wine. Someone joked about dessert. The sound of forks against plates felt louder now, sharper, like it was happening on the other side of a thin wall in my chest. I sat on the bed and stared at the floor. Grounded. The word echoed in my head, absurd and heavy at the same time. Not because it had power, but because everyone had let it. I pulled my phone out, thumb hovering over the screen. I could text a friend. I could leave. I could call a rideshare and disappear into the night, but I didn't. Because a part of me, the part my father had shaped carefully over years, kept whispering, "Don't make this worse. Don't embarrass him. Don't embarrass yourself." I hated that voice. A knock sounded on the door. Not loud, not gentle, controlled. "Evelyn," my father said. "Open the door." I stood, took a breath, and opened it halfway. He didn't step inside. He didn't need to. He leaned against the door frame like he owned the air in the hallway. "You embarrassed your sister tonight," he said calmly, "in front of family." I defended myself. I said, "There's a difference." He smiled, thin and tired. "There always is in your version." I folded my arms. "I'm not apologizing for saying no." His eyes hardened for half a second, then softened again. The switch was seamless. "You've always been sensitive," he said. "That's not an insult. It's just who you are, and people like you need guidance." Guidance. I felt something twist in my stomach. "I don't need to be punished to be guided." He sighed, like I was exhausting him. "This isn't punishment. This is structure." "For who?" I asked quietly. He straightened. "For the family." Then he stepped back. "You can come down when you're ready to apologize." The door closed. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where he'd been, listening to his footsteps fade. Only then did my hands start to shake. I locked the door. I sat back down and pressed my palms into my knees until the tremor eased. I told myself not to cry. I'd cried enough in this house over the years, quietly, privately, where no one could accuse me of manipulation. Instead, I looked around the room. That was when I noticed the nightstand drawer was slightly open. It hadn't been that way before. I frowned, stood, and pulled it open the rest of the way. Inside, beneath an old paperback and a spare phone charger, was an envelope, cream-colored, unsealed. My name written across the front in careful, looping handwriting. Evelyn. My breath caught. I knew that handwriting. My grandmother, Ruth, had written my name like that my entire life on birthday cards, on sticky notes, on the first check she ever gave me just because. She died 2 months ago. I sat down slowly and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a folded copy of a document, clipped neatly together. The letter was short. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, then someone has tried to put you back in your place. I wish I could say I'm surprised. I can't fix your father. I tried. But I can protect you. Trust the paperwork, trust the process. And when the time comes, speak clearly and do not apologize for existing. Love. Grandma Ruth." My vision blurred. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling a pressure there I hadn't realized had been building for years. Then I unfolded the document. I didn't understand all of it. Legal language never comes easily. But some things didn't need translation. Beneficiary. Evelyn Carter. My name. Highlighted. I flipped the page, heart racing. It was part of a trust document. Not the full thing, just enough to prove it existed. Enough to prove my grandmother had planned something. Enough to prove my father might not be telling the truth. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. You didn't have to make such a scene. I stared at the screen, anger flaring sharp and sudden. I typed back, then erased it. Typed again, erased again. Finally, I wrote, I didn't make a scene. I survived one. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. No reply. Downstairs, the laughter faded. Chairs scraped back. Plates were cleared. I heard my father's voice again, lighter now, like nothing had happened. That was the moment I understood something important. They could humiliate me publicly and forget it by dessert. I would carry it for years, unless I didn't let them. I carefully slid the letter and document back into the envelope and tucked it into my bag. Not the dresser, not the drawer. Somewhere only I could reach. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do that night. I packed. Not dramatically. No slamming drawers, just essentials. Clothes, charger, the envelope. I left everything else behind. At midnight there was another knock. Softer this time. It was my cousin Noah. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes uncertain. You okay? I nodded. Not really. He glanced down the hallway. Your dad thinks you'll apologize in the morning. I almost laughed. Almost. Noah, I said quietly. If something happens tomorrow, I need you to stay. He frowned. Stay where? In the house. With everyone else. He hesitated. Then nodded. Okay. After he left, I sat on the bed one last time. I thought about apologizing, about smoothing things over, about how easy it would be to go back to being the difficult daughter everyone tolerated as long as I stayed quiet. Then I thought about my grandmother's letter. Do not apologize for existing. At 4:30 a.m., I turned off the lamp. I didn't sleep much, but when morning came, I was ready. Because saying, all right, the night before hadn't been surrender. It had been a pause, and I was done pausing. I left the house before sunrise. No goodbye, no note, no dramatic exit. I moved quietly, the way you do when you don't want to wake a house that has never protected you anyway. I slipped my shoes on by the door, my bag already packed, the envelope from my grandmother pressed flat against my side like a secret I was finally allowed to keep. The air outside was cold and clean. It felt different from the heavy silence inside that house. For the first time since the night before, I took a full breath. I drove to a small diner a few miles away, the kind that never really closes. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and sat in a booth by the window, watching the sky lighten inch by inch. My phone buzzed at 7:41 a.m. A message from Noah. He's going upstairs. I stared at the screen. Another buzz. He looks confident. Of course he did. My father loved mornings like this. Mornings where he believed he'd won before the day had even started. Mornings where he expected compliance, not resistance. I pictured him climbing the stairs, straightening his shirt, rehearsing his expression. The one that said I taught you a lesson. My phone buzzed again. He knocked. I closed my eyes. I could hear it in my head perfectly, his controlled knock, not loud enough to be angry, not soft enough to be kind. Then Noah's next message came through. He said, "Learned your place?" My stomach tightened. A pause. Longer this time. Then, "Evelyn." He opened the door. I held my breath. "Your room is empty." I let the air out slowly, like I'd been holding it my whole life. A minute passed. 2. Then my phone lit up again. Faster now. He's standing there. Not moving. I imagined it clearly, the neatly made bed, the bare dresser, the closet half open and hollow. No Evelyn. No apology. No quiet surrender waiting in the room he'd sent me to. I imagined the confusion creeping in, the kind my father hated most, the kind he couldn't control. Another message. He just came downstairs. He told everyone you ran off. I frowned. Ran off? Like I was a child who'd thrown a tantrum instead of a woman who'd removed herself from humiliation. Lauren smiled. Noah added. She said, "I told you she'd do this." That hurt more than I expected. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, grounding myself in the heat. "Okay," I whispered to no one. Then the messages changed tone. "Hold on. Someone's at the door." I stared at the screen. "Evelyn, it's Michael Harrington." My heart jumped. I typed back immediately. "The lawyer?" 3 dots. Gone. Then, "Yes. He looks upset." I sat up straighter. I hadn't expected him to go to the house first. We hadn't agreed on that. My mind raced through possibilities. Had my father called him? Was this damage control? Or something worse? My phone buzzed again, almost immediately. He rushed in. Didn't wait to be invited. That wasn't like Harrington. From what I'd seen, he was precise, controlled. Another message followed, word for word, like Noah was typing while watching a scene unfold. He said, "Sir, what have you done?" My pulse spiked. I stared at the diner window, suddenly seeing my reflection instead of the street outside. Pale, focused, awake in a way I hadn't been yesterday. "What did you do, Dad?" I whispered. Noah kept typing. "Your dad told him to calm down. Said everything was under control." Michael raised his voice. "I've never seen him do that." My chest tightened. "He said there's a problem with the trust." There it was. The word that changed everything. Trust. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the booth. The diner noise faded around me, the clink of plates, the low murmur of early morning regulars. This wasn't just about grounding me anymore. This was about paperwork. About decisions made without me. About assumptions my father and sister had made because they thought I'd stay quiet forever. My phone buzzed again. "Your dad just said you don't need to be here." I laughed once, short and humorless. "No," I said softly. "I really do." I picked up my bag, slid out of the booth, and walked toward the door. As I pushed it open, cold air hit my face again, sharper this time, more alive. I typed one final message to Noah before stepping outside. "Tell everyone I'm on my way." I paused, then added, "And tell Dad this isn't me running away. This is me coming back with witnesses." I got into my car, hands steady on the wheel. For years, my father had controlled the story by deciding who spoke and when. That morning, he'd expected an apology. Instead, he'd opened a door to an empty room. And he was about to learn that silence, when chosen carefully, can be far more dangerous than shouting. I parked 2 houses down and sat there for a moment with the engine off. The Carter house looked exactly the same from the outside. White siding, trimmed hedges, the kind of place that tells the neighborhood everything is fine even when it isn't. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder and stepped out of the car. With every step toward the front door, memories pressed in. Holidays, birthdays, dinners where I'd learned when to speak and when to disappear. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head, calm and final. "Don't embarrass us." I rang the doorbell. The sound echoed longer than I expected. When the door opened, it wasn't my father. It was my Aunt Marianne. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Evelyn, you came back." "Yes," I said. "I needed to." She stepped aside without another word. The living room was full, not just people but tension. 20 relatives sat in clusters, pretending to talk, pretending not to stare. Conversations stopped as soon as I crossed the threshold. Heads turned. Whispers died mid-sentence. My father stood near the fireplace, arms folded, jaw set. Lauren sat on the couch beside her husband, her posture stiff, her eyes sharp, and standing slightly apart from everyone else was Michael Harrington. He looked relieved when he saw me and angry all over again. "There you are," my father said. His voice was even, but his eyes weren't. "Decided to stop running?" I met his gaze. "I wasn't running," Lauren scoffed softly. "Really? Because leaving before sunrise looks a lot like running." I turned to her. "So does lying by omission." Her smile faltered. My father stepped forward, reclaiming the center of the room like it was instinct. "Enough. This isn't a family meeting for theatrics. We're handling something private." Michael cleared his throat. "With respect, Thomas," he said, "this stopped being private when legal obligations were ignored." My father's mouth tightened. "You're overreacting." Michael opened his briefcase but didn't take anything out yet. "No, I'm responding." That word landed differently. Lauren crossed her arms. "Responding to what? Evelyn doesn't even understand what she's talking about." Michael looked at her, then at me. "She understands enough." I stepped forward, heart pounding but voice steady. "I understand that Grandma Ruth left instructions, and that they weren't followed." A murmur moved through the room. My father laughed once. "Your grandmother was emotional. She didn't always know what she was signing." Michael's eyes flashed. "That's not accurate." "Michael," my father warned, You're crossing a line. Michael didn't move. You crossed it first. Silence fell, thick and immediate. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I could hear my own breathing. Lauren shook her head slowly. This is unbelievable. Evelyn, you're really going to do this? In front of everyone? I looked around the room, at the same people who'd laughed the night before, at the ones who'd looked away, at the ones who now looked curious instead of amused. Yes, I said, because this is where it happened. My father turned to Michael. Tell her she's mistaken. Michael inhaled, long and deliberate. Evelyn is the sole beneficiary named in Ruth Carter's trust. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Lauren stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's not possible. Michael met her stare. It is, and it's documented. My father stepped closer to him. I'm the trustee. Yes, Michael said, which means you were responsible for following the terms, not rewriting them. The word rewriting hit hard. My father's face flushed. You're accusing me of wrongdoing? I'm informing you of exposure, Michael replied calmly. There's a difference. Lauren looked at me then, not angry, not smug, but calculating. Evelyn, what do you want? I answered honestly. I want the truth acknowledged. And then what? She pressed. I didn't hesitate. Then I want protection. My father scoffed. From your own family? From being humiliated and controlled, I said. Yes. Michael finally pulled out a single document and held it in his hand, not reading it yet, just letting its weight be seen. This is only a portion, he said to the room. I haven't presented the full file. My father's eyes locked onto the paper. You wouldn't, he said quietly. Michael's voice stayed level. That depends on what happens next. The room felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in. For the first time that day, my father looked uncertain. Not defeated. Not exposed, but unsure. And that was new. I stood there, surrounded by witnesses, my heart racing but my spine straight. Because for the first time, the rules in this house weren't being set by volume or authority. They were being set by truth. And this was only the beginning. Michael Harrington didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room had already gone silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy against your ears, like pressure before a storm. 20 people sat frozen, suddenly aware that whatever happened next would not be something they could laugh off. My father was still standing near the fireplace, arms crossed, posture rigid. He looked like a man waiting for a challenge he believed he could still win. Michael, he said slowly, you're going to put this family through unnecessary embarrassment. Michael met his eyes. That concern would carry more weight if embarrassment hadn't already been used as a tool. A few heads turned. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Lauren broke the silence. This is ridiculous. Evelyn doesn't even understand the document she's waving around. I understand enough, I said. And so do you. Michael placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it fully this time. The sound of the clasps clicking open echoed through the room. Inside were neatly stacked documents. Originals, copies, tabs, yellow highlights. Paperwork doesn't look dramatic. But in that moment, it felt heavier than any raised voice ever had. I'm going to be very clear, Michael said, so there's no confusion. He removed the first document and held it up. This is the irrevocable trust established by Ruth Carter. My father laughed sharply. Irrevocable just means difficult to change. No, Michael replied. It means impossible to change unilaterally. The word impossible landed hard. He continued. The sole beneficiary named here is Evelyn Carter. He turned the page so everyone could see. My name. Printed. Official. Undeniable. A murmur spread through the room. Lauren shook her head, voice rising. That's not what Dad told me. Michael looked at her. Then you were misinformed. My father stepped forward. I was managing things in the family's best interest. Michael didn't flinch. Your role was administrative, not discretionary. I watched my father's jaw tighten. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Michael set the trust document down and reached for another stack. Next, he said, our email communications. Lauren's face went pale. I don't know what you think you have, she said quickly. But Michael held up a printed page. These are messages exchanged between you and your father regarding beneficiary changes. The room seemed to lean forward all at once. He read aloud, his voice precise and calm. She won't fight it. she never does. Once everything's finalized, she won't have a choice. I felt the words hit my chest like cold water. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Lauren stood up. "That's out of context." Michael didn't look at her. He turned another page. "If Evelyn asks questions, tell her she's getting a small amount. She doesn't need to know the rest." My father's face flushed deep red. "That's enough," he snapped. "This is a family matter." Michael looked straight at him. It stopped being a family matter when legal obligations were breached. The word breached hung in the air. I took a step forward. "For years," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "I was told I was too sensitive, too difficult, too emotional." I looked around the room, and every time I stayed quiet, you all called it maturity. I turned back to my father. "But you counted on that silence." He stared at me, eyes sharp. "You're twisting this." "No," I said. "I'm finally explaining it." Lauren spoke again, her voice shaking now. "Evelyn, please. You're humiliating us." I met her gaze. "You laughed when I was humiliated." That landed harder than anything else I'd said. Michael cleared his throat and reached for one final document. "There's one more item," he said. My father's eyes flicked to the paper, then away. "This house," Michael continued, "is not owned by Thomas Carter." The room erupted. "What? That's impossible. He's lived here for decades." Michael raised a hand slightly. The room quieted again. "The property was purchased by Ruth Carter and never transferred. Under the trust terms, ownership passes to the beneficiary." He turned to me. "To Evelyn." My father staggered back a step, catching himself on the arm of a chair. "That's not true," he said hoarsely. "That's my house." Michael's voice remained calm. "You live here. You do not own it." Lauren sank back onto the couch, staring at the floor. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. For the first time in my life, the power in that room had shifted, not because I raised my voice, not because I fought harder, but because I had evidence. My father looked around, searching for support. 20 faces stared back at him, not laughing, not cheering, just watching. I spoke one last time. "You grounded me because I said no," I said quietly. "You thought you could put me back in my place." I paused. "But this," I gestured to the documents, to the witnesses, to the truth laid bare, "this is my place." Michael closed the folder. "This matter will now proceed through proper legal channels," he said, "with or without cooperation." The clock on the wall ticked loudly. No one spoke. And in that silence, something irreversible happened. The man who had controlled that house for decades lost the room. No one moved at first. It was strange how fast the room emptied of sound, as if the truth had sucked all the air out with it. 20 people sat there, suddenly unsure where to look, what to say, or whose side they were on now that the rules had changed. My father broke the silence. "This is absurd," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't convince anyone. "Michael, you're exaggerating. We'll clear this up privately." Michael closed his briefcase with a soft, deliberate click. "There's nothing private left to clear up, Thomas." Lauren stood up slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. "So what happens now?" she asked. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore, it was thin. Michael turned to her. "Now the trust is protected. Any further attempts to alter or misrepresent it would expose both of you to serious consequences." My father's face hardened. "You're threatening us." "I'm explaining the law," Michael replied. That distinction mattered. For the first time, my father didn't have a comeback ready. He looked at me, searching for something familiar. Guilt, hesitation, the reflex to smooth things over. He didn't find it. "You could have handled this quietly," he said. "You chose to shame us." I answered before Michael could. "You shamed me first." The words felt steady coming out, not explosive, not emotional, just true. Around the room, people began to shift. My Aunt Marianne stood and crossed her arms. My uncle cleared his throat, then sat back, suddenly very interested in the carpet. No one laughed now. Lauren's husband, Jason, finally spoke. "Lauren, you told me this was settled." Lauren looked at him, panic flashing across her face. "I didn't think." "That's the problem," he said quietly. That sentence seemed to land harder than any accusation. Michael checked his watch. I'll be filing a formal notice to secure the trust immediately, he said. And a petition to review the trustee's conduct. My father's jaw dropped. Review? Yes, Michael said. That's standard when fiduciary duty is questioned. Fiduciary duty. It sounded clinical, neutral, and yet it sliced clean through decades of assumed authority. I took a breath. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said, turning to the room. I'm here to make sure this never happens again. My father scoffed. You think paperwork makes you powerful? No, I said. It makes me safe. That was the moment something in his expression shifted, not anger, not arrogance, but something closer to fear. Lauren looked at me again, her voice low. So what are you going to do? Kick us out? Every head turned toward me. I shook my head. No. Relief flickered across a few faces. But things will be different, I continued. Everything from here on out will be documented. Transparent, respectful, or it won't happen at all. Michael nodded once, approving. My father stepped back, suddenly aware of how many people were watching him now, not as a leader, not as an authority, but as a man being measured. This isn't over, he muttered. No, I agreed. It isn't. Michael placed a business card on the table. I'll be in touch regarding next steps. Then he turned to me. Evelyn, are you ready to leave? I looked around the room one last time. At the chairs where people had laughed, at the table where I'd been sentenced like a child, at the house that had never felt like mine until now. Yes, I said. As we walked toward the door, my father called after me. You've changed, he said. I paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back. No, I said. I just stopped shrinking. Outside, the air felt lighter. Michael waited until we reached the sidewalk before speaking. You handled that well. I was terrified, I admitted. He smiled faintly. Courage usually feels like that. I glanced back at the house once more. The curtains twitched. Someone was already rewriting the story inside. They could try. But the truth had witnesses now. And for the first time, I knew something with complete certainty. Whatever came next, I wouldn't face it alone, and I wouldn't face it silent. The legal process didn't move fast. It never does. But it moved forward, and that alone felt like oxygen. Within a week, Michael filed the paperwork to formally secure the trust. The accounts were frozen, not in a dramatic way, just enough to ensure nothing could be shifted quietly while family discussions continued behind closed doors. That phrase, family discussions, had lost its power over me. My father called once, not to apologize, to negotiate. You don't have to make this hostile, he said, his voice carefully neutral. We can work something out. I leaned against the kitchen counter in my apartment, staring at the envelope from my grandmother, now tucked safely in a drawer. I'm not being hostile, I replied. I'm being clear. Silence on the line. You're making things difficult, he said finally. I almost laughed. Almost. I spent years being easy, I said. This is what difficult looks like. He hung up without saying goodbye. Lauren texted me late one night. I didn't think it would go this far. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. You thought I'd stay quiet. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. No reply. Michael checked in regularly. Always calm, always precise. He explained the next steps the way someone explains a map, slowly, clearly, without judgment. Your father may contest, he said during one call, but the documents are solid. And if he does? I asked. Then the truth repeats itself, he said. Courts are very patient with facts. That made me smile. In the meantime, my life began to expand in small, surprising ways. I paid off the credit card I'd been carrying for years, the one my father used to mention as proof I was irresponsible. I signed a new client contract without feeling like I needed permission to succeed. I slept better. No more waiting for the next comment. No more rehearsing defenses in my head. One afternoon, my cousin Noah stopped by with coffee. You know, he said, sitting on my couch, people are talking. I raised an eyebrow. Good or bad? He shrugged. Different. That felt right. Some relatives reached out quietly, short messages, careful words. I didn't realize how bad it was. I'm sorry, I laughed. I should have said something. I didn't respond to all of them. Not because I was angry, but because I was learning something new. I didn't owe closure to everyone who witnessed my pain. My Aunt Marianne invited me to lunch. She looked nervous when we sat down, stirring her soup too long. "I should have spoken up sooner," she said. I nodded. "I know, and I meant it. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just acknowledgement." The biggest change, though, was internal. For the first time, my decisions didn't pass through my father's imagined approval before I made them. I stopped shrinking my dreams to fit other people's comfort. I stopped apologizing for saying no. One evening, I pulled the framed photo of my 17-year-old self out of my bag and set it on my desk. She was smiling in that picture, hopeful, unsure, trying very hard to be good. "I've got you now," I whispered. The trust would take time to fully resolve. There would be hearings, filings, signatures. There might be resistance. But the outcome was no longer the point. The point was this. I had stood in the room where I'd been humiliated and told the truth out loud, with witnesses. And I had walked away intact. For years, my father controlled the family by deciding whose voice mattered. Now, his voice was just one among many. And mine, steady, measured, unapologetic, finally belonged to me. A few months later, I stood in my apartment on a quiet Sunday morning, sunlight cutting across the floor in clean, ordinary lines. Nothing dramatic was happening. And that, somehow, felt like the biggest victory. The trust was still moving through the legal system, slow, methodical, boring, in the way justice often is. My father kept his distance. Lauren stopped reaching out. The family adjusted, awkwardly at first, then permanently. Life didn't become perfect. It became mine. I learned something important in the aftermath of that dinner, the kind of lesson no one teaches you directly. You don't lose your voice all at once. You give it away in pieces. Each time you're told to, keep the peace. Each time you're laughed at and told it's not that serious. Each time you apologize just to make the room comfortable again. I thought saying all right that night meant I was giving up. I was wrong. It meant I was choosing when to speak. What changed everything wasn't money or paperwork or a lawyer walking into a room. It was the moment I stopped believing that love required humiliation. That family required silence. That being good meant being small. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've ever been corrected in public, dismissed in private, or punished for setting a boundary, hear this clearly. You are not difficult for wanting respect. You are not dramatic for telling the truth. And you are not wrong for choosing safety over approval. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't shouting back. It's walking away, gathering your evidence, and coming back with clarity. That night, my father tried to put me back in my place. What he didn't realize was that I had already found a better one, and I never needed his permission to stand there.